There is a particular cruelty in a peace bought with a life that was never allowed to live. It is a hollow victory, a treaty written in the ink of silent suffering. They called it a sacrifice, a noble word for an act of disposal. They spoke of the greater good, a phrase used to justify the crushing of the small. But a soul is not a coin to be spent, and a heart is not a weight to be balanced on the scales of war. When they cast out the broken thing, they did not anticipate that its jagged edges might fit perfectly into the hollow of a king's hand, not as a weapon, but as a key. And they could never have imagined that a king, who had presided over a long and bitter peace, would look upon that discarded key and decide to start a war not for a kingdom, but for the girl they had thrown away. The combs they used on Alara's hair were carved from sun-bleached wood, but they felt like bone scraping against her scalp. The women preparing her worked in silence, their faces grim masks of duty. They avoided looking at her face, their eyes skittering away from the left side of her throat, from the scar that marred her. It was a puckered, silvered ruin of flesh, a jagged line that ran from just beneath her ear to the hollow of her collarbone. A remnant of the milk fever that had stolen her voice as a child and branded her as imperfect. In the Sunstone clan, where beauty was currency and flawlessness a virtue, her scar was a declaration of worthlessness. She was a crack in a perfect vase, a blemish on a golden tapestry. Today, that blemish was being polished away. Today, she was to be the sacrifice. A peace offering to the Shadowfang pack, the wolf shifters who had been their enemies for a generation. If Alara's story is already pulling at your heartstrings, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you think of her journey so far. Your support keeps these stories coming. Her father, Chieftain Valerius, had announced it at the Dawn Council. His voice, a booming baritone that could command 1,000 warriors, had rung with false solemnity. My daughter, Alara, will cross the Veil of Whispers. She will be our offering to the Alpha King, a symbol of our desire to end this bloodshed. The elders had murmured their approval. A flawed daughter for a lasting peace, a fair trade. Valerius had not looked at her once. He had not seen her as a daughter for a decade. He saw her only as a political pawn he could not marry off, a shame he kept hidden in the quiet wings of his sprawling lodge. Now, she had a use. Her death would be her only significant contribution to the clan. I am a tool being discarded. The thought was not bitter, merely a fact, worn smooth by years of acceptance. My only purpose is to break. They dressed her in a simple white shift, the traditional garment for the honored dead. The fabric was rough against her skin, a final small cruelty. They did not braid her hair with the sun blossoms of a bride or the obsidian beads of a warrior. It was left to hang, a plain brown sheet against the stark white. She was not being given, she was being abandoned. When they were done, they led her from the warm, honey-scented confines of the lodge into the blinding light of the main square. The sun, the deity of her people, felt like a stranger on her skin. Clan members lined the path, their faces a mixture of pity, relief, and morbid curiosity. No one met her gaze. To look upon the sacrifice was to invite ill fortune. She was already a ghost to them. Her father stood waiting at the edge of the Sunstone territory, where the golden, sun-drenched plains gave way to the unnerving twilight of the Veil of Whispers. The forest that marked the Shadowfang lands was a wall of impenetrable gloom, its trees like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. He held a small, leather-wrapped parcel. "Sustenance for your journey," he said, his voice clipped. He did not say for your short journey. He did not need to. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. She would be dead by nightfall. He pressed the parcel into her hands. His fingers were warm, but his touch was as impersonal as a merchant settling a debt. You will walk until you reach the great shadow oak at the heart of the wood. You will wait there. The Alpha will find you. He instructed. his eyes fixed on a point over her shoulder. He could not even bear to look at the flaw he was sending to its doom. She gave a small, jerky nod. Her voice was a ruin, a ragged whisper she rarely used, as the effort was too great and the sound too jarring for the delicate ears of her people. Silence had become her armor and her cage. She turned from him, from the golden light and the land of her birth, and took her first step into the shadows. The air grew instantly cold, scented with damp earth and decay. The whispers started almost at once, the legendary magic of the veil that was said to drive men mad. But Alara's mind was already a quiet, desolate place. The whispers of the wood were no more haunting than the silence of her own people. She did not look back. There was nothing there for her to see. The transition was absolute. One moment the world was gold and amber, the air warm and buzzing with life. The next, it was silver and gray, the air still and cold enough to raise gooseflesh on her arms. The Vale of Whispers was not just a forest, it was a border between realities. The sun did not penetrate the dense canopy of black-barked trees. Light filtered down in ethereal, shifting beams of moonlight, even though it was daytime. The whispers were real, faint as the brush of a moth's wing against the ear, weaving through the eerie silence. They spoke of sorrow, of loss, of ancient battles fought and forgotten. Alara clutched the rough fabric of her shift, her knuckles white, and walked on. Her father had told her to find the Shadow Oak. It was the sacred heart of the Shadowfang territory, and leaving her there was the ultimate gesture of submission. Anisht, offering laid upon the enemy's very altar. The Vale of Whispers sounds absolutely haunting, doesn't it? Let me know in the comments what you think will happen when Alara meets the Alpha King, and don't forget to like this video if you're hooked. The forest floor was a soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves, muffling her footsteps. Strange, bioluminescent fungi cast a pale blue and green glow on the path, illuminating twisting roots that looked like grasping claws. An hour passed, or perhaps 3. Time seemed to warp in this place. The cold was sinking into her bones, a deep, persistent chill that the meager warmth of her own body could not fight. She unwrapped the parcel her father had given her, a single stale loaf of bread and a small, shriveled apple. Enough to stave off hunger, but not enough for a real journey. It was a final, dismissive gesture. She ate half the bread, saving the rest. Hope was a fool's luxury, but instinct was harder to kill. She pressed on, the whispers her only companions, the glowing fungi her only guides. She knew she was being followed long before she saw anything. It was a feeling, a prickling on the back of her neck, the sensation of a predator's gaze. The whispers in the wood seemed to hush, holding their breath. The air grew heavier, charged with a palpable sense of power. She stopped, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She scanned the dense gloom, the spaces between the ancient trees. Nothing. And yet, she was not alone. She forced herself to take another step, and then another. A twig snapped to her right. It was a loud, deliberate sound in the profound quiet. Not the careless step of a deer, but the calculated placement of a hunter's foot. A massive wolf emerged from the shadows, its form coalescing from the darkness as if the very night had given it shape. It was the largest creature Alara had ever seen, the size of a warhorse. Its fur was the black of a moonless night, shot through with silver that glinted in the fungi's glow. Its eyes were molten gold, luminous and intelligent, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that should have been terrifying. But instead of terror, she felt a strange, inexplicable sense of recognition, as if some deep, buried part of her soul knew this creature, had been waiting for it. The wolf padded closer, its massive paws making no sound on the moss. It circled her once, a slow, deliberate movement, and she remained perfectly still. It was so close she could feel the heat radiating from its body, smell the scent of wild earth and ancient forests that clung to its fur. It stopped in front of her, its head level with her chest, and simply looked. There was no menace in that gaze, only a profound, assessing curiosity. It was looking at her, truly looking, in a way no one had looked at her in years. The wolf inclined its head, a gesture that was almost deferential. It turned, its powerful body a fluid grace, and walked a few paces into the forest, then stopped and looked back at her. The message was clear: follow. And so, inexplicably, she did. If she was to die, being led to her death by this magnificent creature felt far more dignified than waiting alone at a tree. She followed the wolf deeper into the vale, through paths that twisted and turned, leading her further from the world she knew. The wolf moved with an effortless power, occasionally pausing to ensure she was keeping pace. It led her for what felt like hours, deeper into the heart of the forest, until the ancient trees grew so vast and their canopy so dense that the world became a twilight cathedral. This encounter with the wolf is giving me chills. What do you think the wolf represents? Drop your theories in the comments and smash that like button if you're as invested as I am. And then, they arrived. The shadow oak. It was not a tree. It was a monument to eternity. Its trunk was wider than 10 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Its bark a deep, almost black charcoal veined with pulsing silver light. The roots spread across the ground like the tentacles of some ancient benevolent god, creating alcoves and hollows. The canopy above was so vast it blocked out any glimpse of sky, and yet the tree itself glowed with an inner luminescence, bathing the clearing in a soft, ethereal light. It was breathtaking, and it was not empty. Figures stood in the clearing. Wolf shifters, Ilara realized, though they were all in their human forms. They were tall, powerful, dressed in dark leathers and furs. They watched her with wary, golden eyes. The wolf that had led her padded to the center of the clearing, near the base of the great oak. And then, it shimmered. The air around it distorted, and the form began to change. It was a fluid, seamless transformation, a shift from beast to man that defied the laws of nature. The massive wolf dissolved into a blur of shadow and silver light, and in its place stood a man. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. His hair was midnight black, falling to his shoulders in thick waves. His skin was pale, almost luminous in the oak's glow. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same molten gold as the wolf's, filled with the same intense, unwavering intelligence. He was dressed simply in dark breeches and a tunic of deep indigo, but he radiated power. An alpha's power. This was the Alpha King of the Shadowfang Pack, the man her father had sent her to, the man meant to end her life. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her plain white shift, her bare feet, her uncovered hair. And then his eyes found the scar on her throat. She tensed, bracing herself for the revulsion, the dismissal, the confirmation of her worthlessness. But his expression did not change. He simply looked. And then, he did something Ilara had never expected. He smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was a small, soft curve of his lips, tinged with sadness, and, perhaps, a flicker of hope. "Welcome, Ilara of the Sunstone clan," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "I am Kale, Alpha of the Shadowfang, and you are not the sacrifice you were meant to be." The words hung in the air, impossible and real. Ilara stared at the Alpha King, at Kale, her mind struggling to process what he had just said. "You are not the sacrifice you were meant to be." It made no sense. That was precisely what she was. a broken thing sent to die. I I do not understand, she managed, her voice a hoarse, barely audible rasp. Speaking felt foreign, the words scraping her throat. Kale's golden eyes softened further. He took a single step closer, and she did not flinch. You were sent to die, he said, his voice gentle as if he understood the brutal truth and was not judging her for it. But I will not kill you. I never intended to. The war with your clan, it was a stalemate, a senseless loss of life. I wanted peace. But your father, his jaw tightened, a flash of anger flickering across his face. Your father, Valerius, he refused every offer, every olive branch. He demanded submission. Not peace, but conquest. Kale gestured to the shifters standing around the clearing. My people are tired of war. We are strong, but we are not endless. So I agreed to his terms, a symbolic gesture. He could send his offering and I would receive it. I thought. He paused, his gaze intense on hers. I thought he would send a warrior, someone expendable in title, but a gesture of respect. Instead, he sent you. This plot twist is incredible. Did you see this coming? Let me know in the comments if you predicted Kale's true intentions, and hit like if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. The weight of his words settled over her. Her father had not sent a warrior. He had sent his broken, voiceless daughter, not as a gesture of respect, but as a final insult. A way to fulfill the terms of a peace treaty while showing his utter contempt for the Shadowfang. Kale must have seen the understanding dawn in her eyes because he shook his head, his expression hardening. He sent you knowing I would see you as worthless, as an insult, and perhaps hoping I would be so enraged I would break the treaty, giving him justification to continue the war. He took another step closer, and this time she could see the controlled fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. He miscalculated. His voice dropped to a low, fierce murmur. Because the moment I saw you walking through my forest, trembling but unbroken, I knew you were not worthless. You were brave. Brave. The word was a shock, a stone dropped into the still pond of her self-perception. No one had ever called her brave. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came. The words were too large, too alien. Kale seemed to understand her struggle. You do not have to speak, he said softly. Not if it pains you. He gestured to a fallen log near the base of the oak. Please, sit. You must be tired. Hungry. She moved to the log on unsteady legs and sank down onto the rough wood. It was easier to breathe sitting. The world felt less like it was spinning. One of the shifters, a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes, approached with a water skin and a cloth-wrapped bundle. She knelt before Ilara and offered them with a gentle smile. Drink, little dove, the woman said, her voice warm. You are safe here. Ilara took the water skin with trembling hands and drank. The water was cold and pure, tasting of mountain springs and clean stone. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She unwrapped the bundle to find fresh bread, soft cheese, and dried meat. Real food. A kindness. She ate slowly, aware of Kyle's gaze on her, but it was not intrusive. It was watchful, protective even. As she ate, he spoke again. Your father's insult has given me a different kind of leverage, Kale said, his voice taking on a harder edge. He sent you to me as an offering. By the old laws, by the terms of the treaty he himself dictated, you are now under my dominion. You belong to the Shadowfang Pack now, Ilara. Her heart stuttered. Belong. The word should have terrified her. It should have felt like a chain. But Kale's tone was not possessive. It was declarative. A statement of fact, but not a threat. That means, he continued, his golden eyes finding hers again, that I am responsible for you, for your safety, your well-being. Your life is mine to protect. He paused, letting the words sink in. And I will protect it. Fiercely. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. He was not lying. This powerful, terrifying man, this alpha king, was offering her protection. Her, the discarded, broken girl. Why? As if reading the question in her eyes, Cale knelt down before her, bringing himself to her eye level. It was a gesture of respect, of equality. I know what it is to be judged for something beyond your control, he said, his voice low and private. I know what it is to be seen as less because of a perceived flaw. He looked down at his own hands, his expression distant. My father was alpha before me. He believed strength was measured only in physical power, in ruthlessness. I was different. I valued strategy, diplomacy. I cared for the weak and the old, not just the warriors. He saw me as soft, a failure. He looked back up at her, his eyes reflecting an old pain that mirrored her own. When I challenged him for the position of alpha, it was not out of ambition, but out of necessity. He would have led our pack to ruin. I won, but I have spent every day since proving that strength comes in many forms. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched the scar on her throat with the tip of his finger. The touch was feather-light, reverent. This is not a flaw, Ilara. It is a mark of survival. You lived, you endured. That is strength, and I see it. Cale's words are so powerful and healing. If you're feeling the emotional weight of this moment, leave a comment about what this scene means to you. And please, like this video to show your support for stories about finding your true worth. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and unexpected. No one had ever touched her scar with kindness. No one had ever called it anything but a ruin. His words were a balm to wounds she did not know could be healed. Cale withdrew his hand and stood, his expression shifting to one of quiet determination. You will stay here, in the heart of my territory. You will be given a place of your own. You will be clothed, fed, and protected. You are not a prisoner, Ilara. You are. He hesitated, searching for the right word. A guest of honor. And perhaps, in time, if you wish it, something more. The implication hung in the air. Not a demand, but an offer. A possibility. She looked up at him, this fierce, beautiful man who had just upended everything she thought she knew about her own fate. And for the first time in her life, she felt a small, fragile ember of hope ignite in her chest. Perhaps, she thought, the life I was meant to live is only just beginning. The days that followed Ilara's arrival were a study in contrasts. She was given a small, beautifully appointed cabin on the edge of the central clearing, near the shadow oak. It was built from dark wood and river stone, with a peaked roof covered in moss. Inside, it was warm and inviting, with a bed piled high with furs, a stone hearth that crackled with a perpetual fire, and shelves filled with smooth stones and carved wooden figures, gifts from pack members welcoming her. It was more comfort than she had ever known. The Shadowfang pack treated her with a wary, cautious respect. They did not know what to make of her, this silent, scarred girl from their enemy's territory who had somehow earned their alpha's protection. But they did not treat her with the cold dismissal she had grown accustomed to. They greeted her with nods, offered her food, and made space for her at the communal fires. It was unsettling and wonderful. Cale was a constant, grounding presence. He did not push her to speak, did not demand anything from her. He simply was. He would visit her cabin each morning, bringing her fresh water from the spring or a basket of berries the children had gathered. He would sit with her by the fire and tell her stories of the Shadowfang, of their history and their traditions. His voice was deep and soothing, and she found herself drawn to it, to him. He told her of the pack's structure, how loyalty and honor were prized above all, how even the lowliest pup was valued and protected. It was a world so different from the Sunstone clan, where hierarchy was rigid and perfection was paramount. One evening, as they sat in comfortable silence, Cale broached a subject that had been hanging between them, unspoken. "Your father will expect a response," he said, his tone careful. "He will expect confirmation that you have been dealt with, that the terms of his offering have been met." Alara looked at him, a question in her eyes. Kyle leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I will send him a message. I will tell him that I have received his offering. I will tell him that the terms are satisfied. I will not lie to him, Alara. But I will also not tell him the truth of your well-being. Let him believe what he wishes. Let him think you are dead, if that is what brings him comfort." The thought of her father believing her dead sent a strange, hollow ache through her chest. It was not grief, but rather the final severing of a bond that had never truly existed. She gave a small, decisive nod. Yes. Let him believe it. Cale's eyes softened. "Good," he said quietly. "Then as far as the world is concerned, Alara of the Sunstone clan died in the Vale of Whispers. And someone new, someone who will be whatever she chooses to be, has been born here, among the Shadowfang." His words were a gift, a promise of a blank slate. She could feel the weight of her old life slipping away, piece by piece. The way Cale is giving Alara a new beginning is beautiful. What would you choose to become if you could start over? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like if you're loving this transformation. As weeks turned into a month, Alara began to find her place within the pack. She was drawn to the children, the pups who ran wild through the forest, shifting from wolf to human and back with joyous abandon. They were curious about her, about the silent woman who lived near the Alpha's hall. A small, brave pup named Cinder, a girl of perhaps 6 summers with copper-colored fur in her wolf form, was the first to approach. She had toddled up to Alara one afternoon, as she sat by the stream that ran through the clearing, and simply plopped down beside her, offering a chubby hand full of smooth, colorful pebbles. Alara had taken them with a grateful, watery smile, and Cinder had beamed as if she had just given the greatest treasure in the world. It had been the beginning of a bond. Cinder became Alara's shadow, chattering away in her high, lilting voice about pack gossip, the best places to find wild honey, and the names she had given to all the forest creatures. Alara listened, her silence no barrier to the child's affection. And slowly, painstakingly, she began to respond. Not with words, but with gestures, with drawings in the dirt, with gentle touches. One afternoon, Cinder asked her a question that cut to the heart of her fear. "Why don't you talk?" the little girl asked, her head tilted, her amber eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Alara hesitated, then gently touched her throat, tracing the line of her scar. Cinder looked at the mark for a long moment, then reached out and touched it with her small, grubby finger. "Did it hurt?" she asked softly. Alara gave a slow nod. Yes, it had hurt. It still hurt, sometimes. Cinder frowned, a fierce little expression that was far too old for her young face. "People who hurt people are mean," she declared, with the absolute conviction of a child. "Cale says we don't have to be afraid of our hurts. We just have to be brave with them." Alara felt tears sting her eyes, from the mouths of babes. This child, with her simple, unjaded wisdom, had just articulated something Alara had never been able to grasp. She pulled Cinder into a hug, and the little girl squealed and hugged her back fiercely, all warm, wriggling affection. It was in moments like these that Alara began to understand what Cale had meant. Strength came in many forms. And sometimes it was found in the simple act of choosing to be kind, even when the world had been cruel. Her relationship with Kale deepened as well, though it was slow and careful, built on trust rather than demand. He taught her the ways of the forest, how to read the signs of the animals, how to find safe paths through the dense undergrowth. He taught her about the Shadowfang's magic, the lunar gifts that ran in their bloodlines. He, himself, was a lunar guardian, a rare and powerful gift that allowed him to channel the moon's energy into protective wards and devastating offensive magic. It was the reason his eyes glowed gold even in human form, a mark of the moon's favor. One night, he took her to a high cliff that overlooked the pack's territory. The full moon hung low and heavy in the sky, bathing the world in silver light. "This is my favorite place," Kyle said, his voice quiet in the vast, silent night. "When the weight of leadership becomes too heavy, I come here. The moon. She reminds me that I am not alone, that I am part of something larger." Alara looked up at the moon, its luminous face serene and eternal. She felt a strange kinship with it. The moon was scarred too, its surface pocked and uneven. And yet, it was beautiful, revered, essential. This scene under the moon is absolutely magical. If you're enchanted by the bond growing between Alara and Kale, drop a like and tell me in the comments what you love most about their relationship. Kyle turned to look at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen from him. "I want to show you something," he said. "My wolf, my true form. But only if you are willing. I do not wish to frighten you." She looked at him, this powerful, gentle man who had given her so much, and she nodded. Yes, she wanted to see. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile, and took a step back. And then, he shifted. The transformation was breathtaking, bones reshaping, muscles flowing, the air shimmering with barely contained power. And then the massive black wolf stood before her, the same one who had led her through the veil. His golden eyes, so achingly familiar, looked at her with a depth of emotion that took her breath away. He lowered his great head, bringing it level with her chest, an offering, a gesture of trust and vulnerability. Slowly, reverently, Alara reached out and placed her hand on the wolf's head, between his ears. His fur was impossibly soft, warm beneath her fingers. She stroked gently, and the wolf let out a low, rumbling sound of contentment. It was not a growl. It was a purr, a sound of deep, abiding peace. For a long moment they stood there under the moon, woman and wolf, two scarred souls finding solace in each other. And Alara realized, with a jolt that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that she was falling in love with him. Not with the Alpha King, not with the powerful shifter, but with Kale, the man who saw her scars as a map of her strength, the man who had given her a life when her own people had thrown her away. The delicate, growing peace of the Shadowfang territory was shattered one cold morning by the arrival of a messenger. A young wolf, barely out of adolescence, came sprinting into the central clearing in his human form, his chest heaving, his face pale with fear. "Alpha! Alpha Kyle!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Kale emerged from his hall, his expression instantly sharp and focused. Alara, who had been helping the pack's healer, Lyra, sort dried herbs, felt her stomach clench with apprehension. "What is it, Finian?" Kale demanded, crossing the clearing in long, urgent strides. Finian dropped to one knee, his head bowed. "The Sunstone clan, Alpha. They march on our borders, a full war party. Chieftain Valerius leads them himself." The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock and alarm through the gathered pack members. Alara's blood turned to ice. Her father. He was coming. And he was bringing war. Kale's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a cold, deadly light. "How many?" he asked, his voice clipped. 200 warriors, Alpha, maybe more. They carry siege equipment. Ladders. Rams. They mean to attack the fortress, Finian reported, his voice shaking. Cale turned to his second-in-command, a grizzled, scarred warrior named Thane. Mobilize the pack, full defensive positions, archers to the walls, scouts to the perimeter, no one engages until I give the order. Thane slammed a fist to his chest in salute and sprinted away, already barking orders. The clearing erupted into controlled chaos, shifters running in all directions, arming themselves, shifting into wolf forms, preparing for battle. Alara stood frozen, her mind reeling. Why? Why was her father doing this? He had sent her to die. He had gotten his peace offering. What more could he possibly want? Things just took an intense turn. What do you think Valerius is planning? Drop your predictions in the comments and hit that like button if you're as shocked as I am by this twist. Cale's gaze found hers across the clearing. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and gently took her by the shoulders. Ilara, you need to go to your cabin. Stay there. Bar the door. Do you understand? His voice was firm, but not unkind. She shook, her head, a sharp, jerky motion. No. She would not hide. Not this time. Cale's eyes softened, but his grip on her shoulders tightened slightly. This is not your fight, he said, his voice low and urgent. Your father is a madman, and I will not let you be caught in the middle of his rage. She reached up and grasped his wrists, holding his gaze with a fierce intensity she did not know she possessed. She shook her head again, more slowly this time. It is my fight. He sent me to die. He is the reason you are in danger. It is my fight. Cale stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the conflict warring in his golden eyes, the alpha who needed to protect his people, and the man who was beginning to understand her. Finally, he exhaled a long, shuddering breath. You are the stubbornest woman I have ever met, he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips despite the dire situation. He released her shoulders but took one of her hands in his, holding it tightly. If you insist on staying, you stay with me, by my side. I will not lose you, Ilara. Not to him, not to anyone. The vow in his words was absolute. She nodded, squeezing his hand in return. Yes. By your side. The Shadowfang fortress was a marvel of strategic defense, built into the side of a rocky hill, its walls formed from living stone and ancient timber. Cale led Ilara to the highest battlement, where they could see the approach. And there, like a spreading infection, was the Sunstone War Party. They marched in disciplined rows, their golden banners snapping in the wind, their armor glinting in the cold, pale light of the morning. At their head, unmistakable even from a distance, was Chieftain Valerius. He rode a massive war horse, his own armor a blinding, ostentatious gold, a stark contrast to the dark forest around him. Cale stood at the edge of the wall, his hands braced on the cold stone, his expression grim. He must have discovered you are alive, Cale said, his voice a low growl. Or perhaps he simply decided the insult of you being here, under my protection, was too great to bear. Ilara looked down at the approaching army, her father, the man who had never looked at her with anything but disdain. He had come to wage war. For what? Pride? Rage? Or perhaps, as Cale suggested, the ultimate insult that she, the discarded daughter, had found value elsewhere. Cale turned to her, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fury. He will not have you back, he said, his voice a vow etched in steel. He threw you away, and I claimed you. By the laws of his own making, you are mine, my responsibility, my... He hesitated, the word hanging unspoken between them. Mate. The word echoed in the silence. It was the deepest bond a shifter could form. A soul connection, recognized by magic and instinct. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. Was that what this was? This pull? This undeniable connection she felt to him? Before she could even process the thought, a voice boomed from below. It was magically amplified, carrying across the distance, her father's voice. "Kale of the Shadowfang!" Valerius roared, his tone dripping with arrogant fury. "You have broken the terms of our treaty. You were to receive our offering and grant us peace. Instead, you shelter the broken thing I cast out. You mock me. You mock the Sunstone clan." Kale's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He leaned over the battlement, his own voice ringing out with the power of an alpha's command, needing no magic to carry. "I received your offering, Valerius. I fulfilled the terms of your treaty. You sent her to die, and I chose to let her live. That is not a breach. That is mercy, something you clearly know nothing about." A murmur went through the Sunstone ranks, a ripple of unease. Valerius's face, visible even from the distance, contorted with rage. "She is mine, my daughter, my property. You have stolen what belongs to me," he shrieked, his voice cracking with unhinged fury. And there it was, the truth laid bare. He did not care about the treaty. He did not care about peace. He cared about his pride, his possession, his absolute control. He could not bear that his discarded, flawed daughter had been valued by someone else. Kale's eyes flashed with a cold, deadly light. "She belongs to no one, Valerius, least of all you. She is a person, and she chose to stay. You threw her away. I gave her a home. Those are the facts. Now, turn your army around and leave my lands, or I will be forced to defend them." For a tense, breathless moment, silence hung over the field. And then, Valerius drew his sword, the metal singing as it left its sheath. "Attack!" he roared, and the Sunstone war party surged forward. The battle for Ilara had begun. This confrontation is absolutely explosive. Are you Team Kale, or do you think there's any redemption for Valerius? Comment your thoughts and smash that like button if you're rooting for Ilara. The clash was brutal and immediate. The Sunstone warriors, trained and disciplined, threw themselves at the fortress walls with ladders and ropes. Arrows flew, a deadly rain from both sides. The Shadowfang defenders, fewer in number but fighting on their own ground and fueled by righteous fury, met them with tooth and claw and steel. Kale shifted in an instant, the massive black wolf leaping from the battlement with a bone-jarring grace, landing in the midst of the enemy with a snarl that shook the air. He was a whirlwind of violence, his jaws snapping, his claws rending. Around him, his pack fought with the coordinated ferocity of a wolf pack defending its den. Ilara, despite Kale's order to stay back, could not simply stand and watch. She scanned the battlefield, her mind racing. She was not a warrior. She had no weapons, but she was not helpless. She saw a young Shadowfang wolf, a teenager pinned beneath a Sunstone warrior, a blade descending towards its throat. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose stone from the battlement and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the warrior's helm with a resounding clang, knocking him sideways just enough for the wolf to wriggle free and tear out the man's throat. The wolf looked up at her, its amber eyes wide with shock and gratitude, before diving back into the fray. She did it again and again, using whatever she could find, disrupting attacks, creating openings for the Shadowfang defenders. She was a healer's assistant, yes, but she had spent her life observing, learning. She knew where a distraction could turn the tide of a small skirmish, but the battle was not going well. The Sunstone warriors were simply too many. They were beginning to breach the outer defenses, pouring into the courtyard. And then she saw him, her father. He had dismounted and was striding through the chaos, his golden armor stained with blood and mud, his face a mask of manic determination. He was heading towards the Shadow Oak, towards the heart of the Pack's territory. towards where Kale fought. She knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that if her father reached Kale, it would not be a fair fight. Valerius was not a man of honor. He would strike from behind, use poison, use any underhanded tactic to win. He had to be stopped. But she was not a warrior. She was a small, scarred, voiceless woman. What could she possibly do? And then, she heard Cinder's voice in her head. Kale says we don't have to be afraid of our hurts. We just have to be brave with them. Brave. She could be brave. She ran. Not away from the battle, but into it. She scrambled down the battlement stairs, dodging clashing bodies, her breath ragged in her chest. She had to reach her father. She had to... What? Stop him? Reason with him? The thought was laughable. But she had to try. She found him at the base of the shadow oak. He was alone, panting, his eyes wild. He looked up and saw her. For a moment, shock flashed across his face. Then it twisted into something uglier. Fury. You, he hissed, his voice a venomous rasp. You should be dead. You were supposed to be dead. And yet you stand there, alive, a blight on my honor. Ilara stood her ground, though her knees trembled. She looked at the man who had sired her, who had given her nothing but pain and rejection, and she felt pity. He was a broken man, consumed by his own bitterness. She shook her head slowly, not a blight, not worthless. Kyle's words echoed in her mind. Brave, valued, loved. Valerius's face contorted with rage. You dare defy me? He raised his sword, the blade gleaming with cold malice. I should have drowned you the day the fever took your voice. I will correct that mistake now. He lunged. Ilara did not have time to think, only to react. She threw herself to the side, the blade whistling past her, close enough to feel the cold kiss of steel against her arm. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the damp earth. Valerius turned, raising the sword for a killing blow, and then a shadow fell over them both. A low, earth-shaking growl filled the air. Kale. He had seen. He had come. The massive black wolf stood between Ilara and her father, his hackles raised, his teeth bared in a snarl that promised death. Valerius froze, his face going pale. For the first time, Ilara saw fear in her father's eyes, real, primal fear. Kale shifted, the transformation blurring back into his human form, but his eyes still blazed with the golden fury of his wolf. You dare, he said, his voice a low, deadly whisper that carried more menace than any shout, to raise a blade to her, in my territory, before my eyes. He took a step forward, and Valerius stumbled back, his bravado crumbling. She is mine! Valerius shrieked, his voice breaking. She is my failure, my shame. You have no right. Kale's lips pulled back in a snarl that was all wolf. She was never yours. She was her own, and you threw her away like refuse. I found her. I claimed her. And now she is mine by right of protection, by right of choice, and by the moon's own blessing. He raised his hand, and a silvery light began to glow around him, the power of the lunar guardian manifesting in a palpable aura. I am the Alpha King Valerius, and you are just a bitter, small man who cannot stand to see someone you deemed worthless be treasured by another. Valerius's face went from pale to red, his rage warring with his fear. You cannot, he spluttered. Kale's voice cut through his protests like a blade. I can, and I will. The silvery light flared, and suddenly, Kyle was not just a man, not just a shifter. He was an avatar of the moon's wrath. The light erupted from him in a blinding wave, a shockwave of pure lunar power. It did not harm Ilara, who knelt at his feet. But it struck Valerius like a hammer. The chieftain was thrown back, his sword clattering from his grip, his body slamming into the trunk of the shadow oak with a sickening thud. He slumped to the ground, gasping, his armor dented, his eyes wide with disbelief. The battle around them had stilled, every eye on the scene at the base of the oak. Kale stood, wreathed in silver light, a god of vengeance. He looked down at Valerius with cold, absolute contempt. You came to my lands demanding what was never yours. You brought war for your wounded pride. You are pathetic. He turned away from the fallen chieftain, dismissing him as utterly as Valerius had once dismissed Alara. He knelt beside her, his large, warm hands gently cupping her face. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice raw with concern. She shook her head. No, she was not hurt. She was free. Kale pulled her to her feet, his arm wrapping around her waist, holding her close. He turned to face the battlefield, to face the Sunstone warriors, who had frozen in shock at the sight of their chieftain's utter defeat. Your leader attacked the woman under my protection. Kale's voice boomed, echoing across the field with the weight of alpha command. He broke the sacred laws of challenge, of honor. He is defeated. This war is over. Leave, now, or face the full wrath of the Shadowfang. For a moment there was only silence, and then, slowly, the Sunstone warriors began to lower their weapons. They looked at each other, at their fallen, disgraced chieftain, and at the terrifying, luminous figure of the Alpha King, and they broke. They turned and fled, a disorganized retreat back into the forest, leaving their siege equipment, their wounded, and their pride behind. The Shadowfang pack did not pursue. They simply stood, victorious and grim, watching the enemy flee. Kale held Alara tightly against his side, his arm a band of iron and warmth. She leaned into him, her body trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. She turned her head to look up at him, and found him already looking down at her. His eyes were no longer the blazing gold of battle fury. They were soft, filled with relief, and something deeper. Something that made her breath catch. You are insane, he said, his voice rough but tinged with a reluctant, awed affection. Running into battle like that, what were you thinking? She could not answer with words, so she answered with action. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek, and she kissed him. It was a soft, tentative press of her lips against his. A thank you, a declaration, and a plea all rolled into one. For a heartbeat, Kale froze. And then, with a low, guttural sound that was part groan, part sigh, he kissed her back. His arms tightened around her, pulling her fully against him. The kiss deepened, becoming fierce and desperate and filled with all the words neither of them could say. It was a promise, a claiming, a vow sealed by the light of the moon and the witness of an entire pack. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and shaken, the world had changed. Alara looked into Kale's eyes and saw her future, not as a sacrifice, not as a discarded thing, but as his queen, his mate, his heart. The battlefield was littered with the detritus of war, broken weapons, scorched earth, and the moans of the wounded. Kale, still holding Alara tightly against him, surveyed the scene with a grim satisfaction. His pack had held. They had won. But the victory was bittersweet. War always was. He turned his attention back to Valerius, who was still slumped against the shadow oak, his breathing labored, his eyes glazed with shock and defeat. Kyle's expression hardened. He gently disentangled himself from Alara, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. Stay here, he murmured, his voice a low command softened by affection. She nodded, though her eyes held a flicker of concern. He walked over to Valerius, his movements deliberate, predatory. The former chieftain looked up at him, and for the first time, Alara saw something in her father's eyes that she had never seen before. Fear. True, abject fear. Kale crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the broken man. You asked her what she was, Kale said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that made even the distant pack members pause to listen. You could not comprehend how the broken, discarded thing you sent to die could be standing before you, alive and radiant, claimed by a king. He glanced back at Alara, his eyes softening for a moment before returning to Valerius with cold steel. I will tell you what she is. She is braver than any warrior you have ever commanded. She is kinder than you will ever understand. She is resilient beyond measure. She survived you, Valerius, and that makes her stronger than you could ever hope to be. Valerius's face crumpled, the bravado and rage draining away, leaving only a hollow, broken man. She was flawed, he whispered, the words a pathetic, desperate justification. Kale's eyes blazed. No, you were flawed. You saw a child who survived a deadly fever and bore the scars of that survival, and you deemed her worthless. You are the flaw, Valerius. You are the broken thing. Not her. Never her. He stood towering over the defeated chieftain. You came here to take her back, to reassert your ownership over a daughter you never valued. But she is not yours to take. She never was. She is her own. And she has chosen to be mine. He turned, his cloak swirling around him, and walked back to Alara. He did not look back at Valerius. The man was no longer worth his attention. He reached Alara and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. He raised their joined hands high so the entire assembled pack and the few remaining terrified Sunstone warriors still tending to their wounded could see. Behold, Kale's voice rang out, imbued with the Alpha's command that made every shifter in the vicinity instinctively straighten. Alara, once cast out, once deemed unworthy, now claimed, now treasured. She is under my protection. She is my chosen. My mate. The word, mate, reverberated through the clearing like a thunderclap. A collective gasp went through the Shadowfang pack, followed by a roar of approval. Howls erupted, a wild, joyous cacophony of acceptance and celebration. The pack approved. They had witnessed her bravery, her kindness. They had seen their Alpha's devotion. She was one of them now. Truly. He calls you broken, Kale continued, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a tenderness that made her heart ache. He does not see that you were forged in a fire that would have turned him to ash. He sees a flaw. His gaze dropped to her throat, to the scar her father had reviled. I see the place where you refuse to break. Your scar is not a mark of shame, Alara. It is the silver veining in the strongest marble. It is a testament to the life you fought to keep, a life they tried to discard. He looked back into her eyes, his own shimmering with the force of his conviction. He never saw you. I see you. I have seen you from the moment you stood in my forest, trembling but defiant. I see your kindness. I see your intelligence. I see your strength. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring his beautiful, fierce face. They were not tears of pain, but of catharsis, of a lifetime of hurt being washed away by the sheer force of his acceptance. I choose you, he declared, his voice ringing with the weight of an unbreakable oath. Not as a prize, not as a symbol, but as my partner, my equal, my heart. The noise of the battle seemed to recede into a distant hum. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the warmth of his hands on her skin, to the unwavering truth in his eyes. When this is over, he vowed, his voice dropping to a raw, reverent whisper, you will not be my consort, hidden away for her own safety. You will stand beside me as my queen, my mate, my Luna. I vow this upon my moon-given soul, upon the magic that flows in my blood. You are mine, and I am yours. Forever. And then, amidst the chaos and the carnage, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of consecration. It was tender and reverent, a sealing of his vow upon her lips. It tasted of the forest, of winter nights, and of absolute, unconditional love. As their lips met, the silvery aura of his lunar guardian magic flared around them, a brilliant, pulsating nimbus of light. It was a silent, incandescent roar of power, a declaration to the world. For a moment, the light was so bright it pushed back the chaos, causing the Sunstone warriors closest to the fortress to stagger back, shielding their eyes from the divine, impossible sight of their hated enemy and their discarded offering, wreathed in the light of a god. The kiss ended, but he did not move away. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. The war for her was over. The war for their future had just been won. CTA 10. This moment is absolutely breathtaking. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and leaving a comment about your favorite moment. What did you think of Alara and Kale's journey? I'd love to hear from you. The flare of Kale's power was the turning point. For the Sunstone warriors, it was a terrifying, supernatural event. They saw their rejected princess, the flawed sacrifice, embraced by a king who shone with the light of the moon itself. They saw their chieftain screaming impotent curses at a goddess. Their morale, already eroded by the Shadowfang's brutal efficiency and their own leader's unhinged obsession, shattered completely. The attack faltered, then broke. Men threw down their weapons and fled back into the woods, their disciplined formations dissolving into a panicked mob. The Shadowfang pack did not give chase. They simply stood their ground, a silent, menacing line, and let the defeated army scramble away. The victory was total. Within the hour, Chieftain Valerius was found, not among the fleeing, but standing alone on the rise where he had commanded his forces, staring at the fortress in stunned disbelief. He was captured, without a fight, his spirit broken not by a sword, but by the sight of the daughter he had scorned being revered as a deity. He was brought in chains to the great hall of the fortress. The pack gathered, their faces grim and triumphant. Kale sat upon his throne of dark wood and living stone, and at his side, in a chair of equal stature, sat Alara. She no longer wore the simple white shift of a sacrifice. Kale had draped his own deep blue cloak, lined with the fur of a silver wolf, over her shoulders. The silver pendant, her pendant, rested against the rich fabric. Valerius was thrown to the floor before them. He looked up, his eyes finding Alara. The hatred was gone, replaced by a baffled, desperate confusion. "What are you?" he breathed, the question a ragged whisper. She looked down at the man who was her father, the man who had caused her a lifetime of pain, and felt nothing. Not hatred, not a desire for revenge, only a vast, empty pity. He was a small man, blinded by his obsession with perfection and power. He could not comprehend a world where a scar was a sign of strength, where kindness was more valuable than beauty. Kale's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through her own. He did not speak. He waited. This was her justice to dispense. The entire hall was silent, every eye on her. This was her final test. Would she be the vengeful queen or the merciful one? She leaned forward slightly, and the cloak fell away from her throat, revealing the scar in the full light of the hall's glowing crystals. She did not hide it. She wore it as Kale saw it, a map of her survival. Her voice, when she spoke, was still quiet, a soft rasp against the silence, but it was clear, and it was steady. "You asked what I am," she said, her words carrying to every corner of the hall. "I am the daughter you threw away. I am the peace you tried to buy with my life. And I am the queen of the man who values me more than you ever valued your own honor." She looked at Kale, then back at her father. "We will not kill you. Death would be an end to your shame. You will live with it." She stood, a figure of quiet authority. "You are stripped of your title. You will be exiled to the withered coast, to live as a common man. You will have nothing but the knowledge of what you lost. Not a daughter, but a kingdom. Her judgment was passed. It was not the brutal justice of a wolf, but the considered incisive justice of a queen. A low murmur of approval went through the pack. Lyra, standing near the throne, met Alara's eyes and gave a sharp, definitive nod. It was a sign of ultimate respect. Acceptance. The days that followed were a blur of healing and rebuilding. The border was secured, and a new peace, a true peace, built on strength and respect, was established. Alara found her place not just as Kale's partner, but as a leader in her own right. Her quiet wisdom, her gentle nature, and her fierce protective instincts earned her the pack's unwavering loyalty. The shifters who had once sneered at her now bowed their heads in reverence. The children of the pack, who had once been taught to fear her, now followed her everywhere, drawn to her kindness. Cinder, now a lanky adolescent wolf, was her constant four-legged shadow. She had found her family. A found family, forged in shadow and loyalty. One evening, as twilight settled over the forest, Kale led her back to the high cliff where he had first shared his secret. They stood together, watching the full moon rise, its pearlescent light bathing the world in silver. Her hand was held securely in his. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. It was peaceful. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the coarse fabric of his tunic familiar and comforting. "They sent me to end a war," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper now, healed by disuse and strengthened by confidence. Kyle turned to look at her, his love a tangible presence in the moonlight. He reached out and gently, reverently, touched the scar on her throat. His touch no longer sent a jolt of surprise, but a wave of deep, abiding warmth. It was not a flaw. It was a part of her story, a part of their story. "And so you have," he replied, his voice a low, contented rumble. He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his beautiful, severe face into something breathtakingly handsome. "Ours." He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 more sunrises, a shared future, and a love that had not just saved her, but had transformed her. The broken dove had not been sacrificed. She had been set free, and she had learned to fly.